The morning air at Westbrook Military Academy was sharp and cold, the kind that made breath rise like smoke from a battlefield. A thin layer of fog hugged the perfectly maintained parade ground, shrouding the century-old buildings in ghostly white. The American flag hung still against its pole, waiting for the day's first breeze. The academy stood as it had since after the Gulf War, a fortress of tradition, discipline, and the promise of military excellence. From the window of his oak-paneled office, Colonel Marcus Whitaker observed the empty ground, a steaming coffee cup warming his weathered hands. At 62, his ramrod-straight posture betrayed nothing of the shrapnel still lodged near his spine, a souvenir from Desert Storm. The walls around him held the evidence of a life dedicated to service. Photos with presidents, Rangers tabs, campaign medals arranged in perfect order. His reflection in the window glass revealed the face of a man who had seen 3 wars and buried too many friends. "They're not ready," he murmured to himself, thinking of the current class of cadets. Young men and women who had never heard a shot fired in anger, never felt the weight of command decisions that sent others into harm's way. Brilliant on paper, perfect in drills, but untested by fire, his intercom buzzed. "Colonel, Lieutenant Commander Hail has arrived." Whitaker nodded to himself. "Send her in. Perhaps she would change that." Across the academy, cadets assembled on the parade ground for morning formation. Crisp rows of pressed uniforms, polished boots, and expectant faces. They stood at rigid attention, rumors swirling about their new physical training instructor. "Heard it's some decorated veteran," whispered one cadet to another. "Better not be another screamer," replied another. "I've had enough of that from Sergeant Miller." Cadet Jason Reynolds stood at the front of the formation, his posture impeccable, his uniform spotless. As squad leader, he took pride in setting the example. At 24, with the strong jaw and confident bearing of a third-generation military man, Jason already carried himself with the authority of an officer. His father, Major General Thomas Reynolds, commanded the 10th Mountain Division. His grandfather had led men at Incheon. Military excellence ran in his blood, and he never let anyone forget it. "Attention!" barked the senior cadet, and the formation snapped even straighter as Colonel Whitaker approached, a figure beside him. What the cadets saw was not what they expected. Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Hail walked with quiet confidence, her stride measured and deliberate. No swagger, no intimidation tactics. She wore simple gray sweats instead of a dress uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. The only notable feature was a thin, pale scar that curved along her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. At 36, her face held the weathered look of someone who had spent years under harsh sun. Yet her eyes remained clear and alert, constantly scanning her surroundings. "Cadets!" Colonel Whitaker's voice carried across the formation without effort. "This is your new physical training instructor, Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Hail." A ripple of whispers moved through the ranks. Lieutenant Commander, that was a Navy rank equivalent to an Army major, not the usual rank for a PT instructor. Commander Hail brings extensive field experience to Westbrook. "You will afford her every courtesy and respect due her rank and position." He turned to Eleanor. "Commander, they're all yours." Eleanor stepped forward as Whitaker departed. She surveyed the formation with a measured gaze that seemed to catalog each face, each posture, each reaction. When she spoke, her voice was calm, neither loud nor soft. The voice of someone who knew she would be heard without shouting. "Good morning, cadets. We have much to accomplish together in the coming weeks. Today, we'll establish baselines. 12 laps around the perimeter. Full gear." Jason shifted his weight slightly. "Ma'am, we typically begin with stretching protocols before. In my experience, Cadet Reynolds." She cut him off without raising her voice. "Enemies don't wait for you to stretch." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But if you prefer, you can perform extra stretching exercises after everyone else finishes." Several cadets failed to suppress smiles. Jason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 12 laps. "Begin now." The formation broke, cadets settling into their run around the half-mile perimeter. Eleanor joined them, maintaining a steady pace at the back of the group, observing form and endurance without comment. By the 4th lap, the formation had stretched out like an accordion, the strongest runners pulling ahead, the struggling ones falling behind. Jason maintained his position at the front, his stride confident, barely breaking a sweat. Beside him ran Cadet Michael Chun, a brilliant tactical student with dreams of Army intelligence. Several paces behind them, Cadet Annie Prescott kept a steady rhythm, her expression focused and determined. "Who does she think she is?" Jason muttered between controlled breaths. 12 laps right off the bat. No proper warm-up, not even wearing a proper uniform. Michael matched his pace. Lieutenant Commander, though. That's not a rank they hand out to gym teachers. Probably some desk officer who needs field experience for promotion, Jason replied. Look at her. No command presence, no authority. My father says women officers are being fast-tracked now. Politics over merit. On the 8th lap, Jason noticed something unsettling. While many cadets were showing signs of fatigue, heavier breathing, slowing pace Eleanor maintained the same steady rhythm she'd started with. Her breathing remained controlled, her form economical, wasting no energy. She wasn't running to impress anyone. She was running like someone who had learned that endurance meant survival. By the final lap, even Jason felt the burn in his legs, the tightness in his chest. Eleanor, however, looked like she could go another 12 without difficulty. As they completed the run, she moved to the front, observing each cadet's condition as they finished. Form a line, she ordered once all had completed the circuit. Recovery positions. As the cadets caught their breath, she walked the line, making small adjustments to posture, offering brief comments on form. When she reached Jason, she paused. Your stride is too long on uphill sections, she said quietly. Shortening your step by 20% would conserve energy and maintain speed. She moved past him. Learned that carrying wounded through the Hindu Kush. Before Jason could respond, she had moved on. The casual reference to combat experience hung in the air between them like an unexploded ordnance. Later, in the academy mess hall, Jason sat with Michael and Annie, picking at a plate of regulation eggs and toast. The morning's training session had left a sour taste that food couldn't erase. She's different, Annie said, breaking the silence. Not like our other instructors. Jason stabbed at his eggs. Different doesn't mean better. Who cares if she can run? PT isn't combat leadership. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. I looked her up in the directory. She's not listed under regular faculty. There's just a mention of special instructor status and a security clearance level I couldn't access. My dad could find out with one phone call, Jason said, but made no move to reach for his phone. Annie studied him over her coffee cup. You're bothered because she corrected you in front of everyone. I'm bothered because she's treating PT like it's just some kind of special ops indoctrination, Jason replied. Women haven't even been allowed in combat roles that long. There's no way she has the kind of experience she's hinting at. Captain Nichols is a woman. Annie pointed out, referring to their tactical operations instructor. 2 tours in Iraq. That's different, Jason insisted. Support roles, probably. Look, there's a reason there are no women in Delta Force or the SEALs. The physical standards are impossible for them to meet. Annie raised an eyebrow. Impossible, or just not allowed until recently. Jason pushed his tray away. Trust me on this. My father knows every major combat commander in the service. If she had any real combat experience, he'd know her name. Miles away from the academy, in a sparsely furnished apartment, Eleanor Hail sat at a small desk, a single lamp casting harsh light over the surface. Before her lay a worn leather journal and a small wooden box. Her fingers traced the edge of the box before slowly opening it. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a silver star, the nation's 3rd highest decoration for valor in combat. She didn't touch the metal. She never did anymore. Instead, she opened the journal, flipping to a page marked with a faded photograph. 5 men and 1 woman herself standing before a helicopter, faces dusty, expressions grim but determined. Written in fading ink, Helmand Province. Team 6, Operation Heron's Flight. Eleanor closed her eyes. The academy, the apartment, the present day all dissolved. Helmand Province, Afghanistan 2012. The air in Helmand Province tasted like dust and cordite. Rounds cracked overhead as Eleanor and Lieutenant Daniel Brooks moved in synchronized rushes toward the downed helicopter. The Taliban ambush had come without warning, catching their extraction team exposed on 3 sides. 2 wounded inside, Brooks shouted over the radio. Walsh is hit bad. Eleanor signaled understanding, then pointed to the flanking route they would take. No words needed, they'd run this drill countless times, had operated together through 17 previous missions. Brooks nodded once, his eyes showing absolute trust in her judgment. They moved as a single unit, covering each other through alternating fire and movement. When they reached the helicopter, Eleanor provided covering fire while Brooks assessed the wounded. Walsh needs immediate evac, Brooks reported, his voice tight. Arterial bleed leg, Eleanor keyed her radio. Sierra Actual, this is Ghost 6. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Request immediate dust-off at secondary LZ. The radio crackled with confirmation as Eleanor helped Brooks apply a tourniquet to Walsh's shattered leg. The young SEAL's face had gone gray with blood loss, but his eyes remained focused, determined. Stay with us, Walsh, she ordered. That's an order. Yes, ma'am, he managed through gritted teeth. As they prepared to move, the distinctive whoosh of an RPG tore through the air. Eleanor's head snapped up, tracking the sound to its source. RPG down, she shouted, but Brooks was already moving. Not down, but toward her, his body slamming into hers with bone-crushing force, driving her behind the helicopter's landing gear. The world exploded into fire and shrapnel. The blast threw them both backward. Eleanor's ears rang with deafening intensity as she scrambled to her feet. Her hands found Brooks, rolled him over. His vest had caught most of the shrapnel, but a jagged piece had found the unprotected side of his neck. Blood pulsed between her fingers as she applied pressure. Medic! She screamed, all radio protocol forgotten. Man down! Brooks gripped her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes locked on hers. The team! He gasped. Get them out, Hale. Lead them home. We're all going home, she insisted, pressing harder on the wound. Stay with me, Daniel. His lips formed words she couldn't hear over the gunfire, but she read them clearly. That's an order. Then his grip slackened, and something vital faded from his eyes, leaving behind only a reflection of the Afghan sky. Eleanor's eyes snapped open, her hand unconsciously moving to the scar on her neck, her own souvenir from that day, shrapnel from the same RPG that took Brooks. She'd received the Silver Star for what happened next, reorganizing the team, establishing a defensive perimeter, coordinating the evacuation of the wounded while calling in air support, all with a piece of metal embedded in her neck. The metal meant nothing compared to the loss. Brooks had been the finest officer she'd ever served with, and his final order to lead had become her guiding principle. She closed the journal and returned the box to its shelf. Tomorrow would test another group of would-be leaders. She would not fail them, even if they didn't yet understand what she had to teach. The next morning broke gray and dismal, rain sheeting down across the academy grounds, turning the parade ground into a muddy expanse. Perfect. Eleanor stood at the edge of the training field, unfazed by the downpour. Her expression remained neutral as the cadets assembled, raindrops streaming down their faces, uniforms already soaking through. Today, she announced once they had formed up, we focus on tactical movement under adverse conditions. In the field, you don't get to choose your weather or terrain. The mission continues regardless. She gestured to the obstacle course she had modified overnight. Low barbed wires strung over mud pits, narrow balance beams slick with rain, climbing walls with minimal handholds. This isn't about showing off or breaking records, she continued. This is about methodical progress under pressure. Out there, she pointed to the horizon, Russian gets people killed. Precision and discipline save lives. Jason surveyed the course with thinly veiled disdain. Ma'am, regulations specify that obstacle training should be postponed during severe weather conditions for safety reasons. Eleanor turned to him slowly, rain streaming down her face. Cadet Reynolds, are you concerned about safety or about getting your uniform dirty? A few stifled laughs emerged from the formation. Jason's face flushed. I'm concerned about proper protocols, ma'am. Protocols? Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Tell me, Cadet, when your transport is hit by an IED and you're evacuating wounded under fire in a monsoon, which protocol covers that scenario? Jason had no answer. The ground doesn't care about your family name, Eleanor continued, her voice carrying to the entire formation despite the rainfall. It doesn't respect rank or protocols. It tests you equally, without mercy or favor. She turned to address everyone. First evolution, low crawl under wire, 20 yards. Maintain weapon control at all times. Training rifles have been placed at the starting line. When you reach the end, recover to standing position and return to formation. First squad move out. The cadets broke formation, collecting the weighted training rifles before taking positions at the starting line. The first group began their crawl immediately, struggling with the slick mud that seemed determined to swallow elbows and knees with each movement. Eleanor moved alongside the course, observing technique without interference. Most cadets adopted an inefficient crawl, failing to use their legs properly, allowing their backs to rise too high, risking the wire. When Jason's turn came, he attacked the course with determination, moving faster than the others, but with a technique that betrayed his lack of real field experience. Halfway through, his rifle sling caught on the wire, jerking him to a stop. Frustrated, he yanked at the weapon, causing the wire to bounce and snag the cadet behind him. Eleanor appeared beside him, kneeling in the mud without hesitation. "Control, not speed," she said quietly. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." With practiced ease, she demonstrated the proper unwinding technique, then continued, "When you rush, you make mistakes. Mistakes get your team killed." Jason freed himself and continued, but his expression had darkened considerably. When he completed the course, mud coating every inch of his uniform, he rejoined the formation with barely contained frustration. As the morning progressed, Eleanor increased the complexity of the drills. The rain intensified, turning the training ground into a quagmire that sapped strength and tested patience. Through it all, she maintained the same calm demeanor, demonstrating techniques when necessary, offering corrections without raising her voice. During a brief water break, Cadet Prescott approached her cautiously. "Commander Hail," Annie began, "may I ask the purpose of these specific drills? They seem different from our standard PT regimen." Eleanor regarded her thoughtfully. "What's your career path, Cadet Prescott?" "Military intelligence, ma'am." "Hopefully field operations," Eleanor nodded. "Then you need to understand that intelligence is only as good as the operator who collects it. These drills teach you to think clearly when your body is screaming for relief. They teach you to maintain awareness when every instinct wants you to focus only on your discomfort." Before Annie could respond, Jason's voice cut through the rain. "With respect, ma'am, these drills seem more suited to special operations training than officer preparation. Most of us are headed for conventional units." Several cadets had gathered around, watching the exchange with interest. Eleanor studied Jason for a moment, then looked at the assembled group. "You think this is special operations training?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "This is kindergarten compared to what real operators endure." Jason's posture stiffened. "Then perhaps our time would be better spent on relevant training, ma'am." The challenge hung in the air between them. The other cadets held their breath, surprised by Jason's boldness. Eleanor regarded him silently, rainwater streaming down her face, her eyes never leaving his. Then, without a word, she removed her instructor's windbreaker and handed it to Annie. Beneath it, her t-shirt clung to a frame lean with muscle, not the bulky strength of a weightlifter, but the functional power of someone forged through years of real-world demands. "Observe," she said simply. What followed left the cadets in stunned silence. Eleanor moved through the obstacle course with a fluid grace that made their earlier attempts look like children stumbling through their first steps. She navigated the mud with minimal disturbance, her body maintaining perfect contact with the ground under the wire. At the wall, she ascended with such efficient movement that she seemed to flow upward rather than climb. Through it all, her breathing remained controlled, her weapon never once losing its proper position. She completed the entire course in less than half the time of the fastest cadet, with none of the struggle or discomfort they had displayed. When she finished, she walked back to the group, mud coating her uniform, but her composure entirely intact. "Relevant enough for you, Cadet Reynolds?" she asked quietly. Michael whispered to Annie, "That wasn't standard officer training." Annie nodded slightly. "I've never seen movement like that outside of what?" Jason demanded, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Combat footage," she replied. "Tier 1 operators," Eleanor called the group back to attention. "Final evolution, team movement under the wire with simulated casualty extraction. Cadets will be divided into 4-person teams. Each team must navigate the full course while carrying a wounded team member on a stretcher. Coordinated movement is essential," she pointed to Jason. "First team, Reynolds, Chen, Prescott, and Davis." Jason found himself designated as team leader with Michael, Annie, and Davis, the largest cadet in the class, as his squad. They were given a standard-issue field stretcher and a weighted training dummy. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he began, addressing Eleanor with the incorrect honorific deliberately. "This exercise is—" "Begin now, cadet," she interrupted, her voice taking on a harder edge than they had heard before. "Your wounded comrade is losing blood while you're complaining about the exercise." Fuming, Jason organized his team, placing the dummy on the stretcher and assigning positions. The weight was considerable, especially in the treacherous mud. As they approached the wire section, the real challenge became apparent. The stretcher would barely fit underneath, requiring perfect coordination between all 4 team members. "Lower," Jason ordered as they struggled under the wire. "Davis, keep your end down." Davis, already straining under the weight, tried to adjust but slipped in the mud, causing the stretcher to tilt and nearly spill the dummy. "Steady," Jason barked. "Chan, take some of the weight from Davis." They maneuvered slowly, painfully through the mud, each yard a battle against exhaustion and the elements. Jason, in the lead position, found himself growing increasingly frustrated with his team's performance. Eleanor walked alongside, observing without comment. Her presence added to Jason's agitation. When they reached the halfway point, she finally spoke. "Your team is struggling because your commands are reactive, not proactive," she said calmly. "You're not reading the terrain ahead, Cadet Reynolds." "We're doing fine, ma'am," Jason replied through gritted teeth. "Your wounded would have bled out by now," she countered calmly. "And Davis is about to collapse from exhaustion because you positioned him incorrectly for his height and strength." Jason felt his control slipping. The rain, the mud, the weight of the stretcher, and now this woman questioning his leadership. It all converged into a burning knot of anger. "Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate the proper technique, ma'am," he said, voice thick with sarcasm. "I would," she replied evenly. "But I learned long ago that some lessons must be experienced, not demonstrated." As they struggled through the final section, Davis's footing gave way completely. The stretcher lurched, and in trying to compensate, Jason also lost his balance. As he stumbled, Eleanor moved to stabilize the stretcher from his side. Something in Jason snapped. In a moment of pure frustration, he straightened abruptly, his shoulder connecting with Eleanor's chest, shoving her backward into the mud. The action was instinctive, unplanned but unmistakably deliberate. Time seemed to stop. The other cadets froze in place, shock evident on their faces. Even Jason looked stunned at his own action, the color draining from his face as he realized what he had done. Eleanor lay in the mud for just a moment, then rose with deliberate calm. Mud caked her uniform, streaked her face, but her eyes, those were different now. The professional reserve had vanished, replaced by something cold and evaluating. Not anger, but the calculating gaze of a predator assessing a threat. The change was subtle but profound, and every cadet felt it. This was not the look of an instructor. This was the look of someone who had faced death and dealt it in return. "Exercise terminated," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that silenced the entire field. All cadets except Reynolds returned to barracks and clean up. As the others hesitantly departed, casting nervous glances back at Jason, Eleanor approached him slowly. She stopped an arm's length away, studying him with that unnerving gaze. "Do you know what you just did, cadet?" she asked. Jason stood at rigid attention, eyes forward. "I assaulted a superior officer, ma'am. I accept whatever punishment." "No," she cut him off. "In tactical terms, what you just did was compromise your entire team. In the field, your action would have left the wounded exposed, your team disorganized, and likely resulted in additional casualties." She stepped closer, her voice dropping so that only he could hear her next words. "On my last operation in Helmand Province, a moment of frustration like that cost the life of the finest officer I've ever known." Jason's eyes widened slightly, the only break in his rigid posture. "You report to the obstacle course at 0400, she continued, her voice returning to its normal volume. "You will undergo a special training evolution designed specifically for you. 24 hours of continuous operation. Come prepared." She turned to leave, then stopped. "And Cadet Reynolds, bring only what you can carry for 20 miles. You'll need every ounce of that famous family endurance you're so proud of." As Eleanor walked away across the muddy field, back straight despite the mud coating her uniform, Jason stood motionless in the rain. For the first time since arriving at the academy, something akin to genuine fear flickered across his face.